Welcome again to Cartoon Crossroads Columbus 2020. I'm Dan Gearino. I'm a news reporter and a member of CXC's board, and I have the pleasure today of speaking with Mark Waid, the writer, editor, and publisher. Mark is a New York Times bestselling author. Over the course of almost 4 decades working in comics, he's developed characters and stories for Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, Wonder Woman, Daredevil, among many others. Kingdom Come, which he created for DC Comics, has become one of the highest selling graphic novels in history. He's written and edited over 2,000 comic titles and received just about every, if not every, major award in the industry. Thank you for being with us today, Mark.
Oh, my pleasure. Let me jump in real quick before we start and say that to say I created Kingdom Come is not completely accurate, because it could not have been done without the artist Alex Ross, who helped me work out the story, or had a vision, and we worked together on it. So I don't want to let that slip. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's start with your current gig.
Okay.
You're the publisher at Humanoids. I know when I think of Humanoids, I think of crazy, amazing sci-fi. But I look at some of the things you're doing now, and it's just kind of an interesting variety of things. So what are you up to these days?
Well, that's just it. I mean, when I inherited the job in March, I guess about a week before the pandemic struck, good timing. We were kind of all over the place in terms of what we're publishing. Not that any of it's not great. It's just that I think to some degree we had maybe run the risk of drifting away from our basic mission statement, our basic core values, which are at Humanoids, which are transgressive works, bold works, stuff that people at other companies are not going to publish because they're afraid, or because they don't feel like the market's ready for that kind of stuff. And I like living in that space. I've always liked living in that space. I've always written, I mean, most of my work is for the majors, as you said, that's, work for hire superhero stuff. But when I go off on my own and do creator-owned stuff, that's where I like to live, because I'd rather be number one in a space that isn't as big than number two in a giant space,
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple different imprints and a couple different kind of that you're doing with Humanoids that goes well beyond some of the epic sci-fi. Tell me a little bit about some of that stuff.
Sure. I mean, Humanoids itself, the core brand is always going to be, your space opera, your science fiction, your sort of hard-edged, like I said, really transgressive stuff. There are 2 other sublines. We have Life Drawn, which is mostly biographical or autobiographical works, or about real world situations that, a lot of mix of slight fiction and nonfiction. And we've done really well with that. Twilight Man is an adaptation that's done really well for us. It's not an adaptation, but it's a biography of Rod Serling in graphic novel form. And we've got another one coming out from the same author, I guess, later next year. And I like being in that space. The other one we have, most pertinent probably, is the Big line, which is our kids book stuff, because that, again, is another area where there's unlimited growth. And that's a place, again, where we need to be. And we've got some really great books along those lines. And anybody who wants to check it out can go to thinkbigbooks.com and take a look at the slate.
Now, we're going to talk in a little bit about a couple specific titles. But one of the things that I know from having seen interviews with you and just seeing your writing about comics is you're someone who, you mentioned something about the history of comics, or about just kind of an affection for the medium, and you'll go off on a tangent. And you're one of the best kind of talkers about comics that I've seen. And I wanted to talk about some of your favorite comics. And you recently wrote a list of 10 books that are among your favorites. And I picked out a few of those titles. And I just wanted to kind of go through them and get an idea of kind of what makes them special.
Sure.
The first one is All-Star Superman. Grant Morrison wrote it. Frank Whiteley drew it with inks by Jamie Grant.
Mm-hmm.
What is it? I mean, of course, this is like obviously an incredible work, but what is it that really makes it important work in your mind?
There's several things. First off, it's a love letter to Superman, which I love. I've been a friend of Grant's for 25 years. I'm always eager to see what his next project is. He's one of my favorite authors in comics because he'll take chances that nobody else is taking. But he also has a reverence for what has gone before and a love for sort of looking at the 70, 80-year-old history of some of these characters and trying to find some way to make it all sort of in a meta way, sort of make sense and sort of hold together. And so All-Star Superman is his take on all the bits and pieces of the Superman lore from the last 80 years that he responds to, but it's not retro, it's not old-fashioned, it's not a nostalgia act. It is him updating some of these concepts like Bizarro, the anti-Superman who lives on a cube-shaped world in space, or Lois Lane getting superpowers and what would that be like? He's so good at that stuff, and I will not accept second place to anyone in my love for Superman, but certainly Grant is vying for the title. And Frank Whiteley's work is just so brilliant. He's a thinking artist. I've worked with him on a book called Offspring a few years ago, just time has no meaning anymore, 20 years ago. And he thinks he's of that ilk of artists that I really like, that's fairly rare, of when you look at a panel, any panel in their kind, everyone who's in that panel, even if they're in the background, is doing something. They're acting. They're not scenery. A lot of comics and a lot of younger artists just tend to, if they throw people in the background, it's really just scenery to set a stage or whatever. But no, Frank's characters all have every one of them is interesting to look at. And so the two of them together, man, that book was a home run to me.
Well, one thing that's interesting when somebody is writing a story that's elements of have been told many times before, is you see the kind of retelling of the origin story. And in this, in All-Star Superman, they do the origin in a page. And it's like, it's kind of, I'm not quite sure what the statement was there, but it seems like that was definitely a statement, kind of like, yeah, you've read the story many times before, but this is different. Or,
yeah.
I mean, what was when you were reading that for the first time and you were in those opening pages? I mean, obviously, considering the creators, you kind of knew it was probably going to be a treat, but what were you thinking as you read that?
But mostly bitter jealousy. A lot of bitter jealousy involved, because nailing Superman's origin in 8 words in 4 pictures is pretty strong. And I get it. I mean, anytime you tell a big work like that's supposed to be a sort of a standalone graphic novel that's an evergreen that anyone can read and will stand the test of time, there is the temptation to sort of make sure that they understand where the character comes from as well as where they're going. And it is true that, Superman's origin, I think at this point, is imprinted on the DNA of everybody in the world. We all know it, like Batman's origin. But the fact that I don't think he would have done it if he couldn't have done it in that stylistic, clever 8 words and 4 panels way. Again, bitterly jealous.
Well, I wonder with that, a story that long, like a 12-part story. I mean, I would think that there would be just some kind of pacing challenges or some. Did you learn anything just in terms of structure from the way that they put that story together?
Not so much. I mean, the pacing issues or the structure is really not as difficult as you might think, because if you've been doing this for any length of time, you're used to writing in 22-page installments or 20-page installments, and it just becomes the rhythm of what you do. Same as when you're writing your news stories, it's the 5 Ws. It's just the thing that is at the basis of it. To the point where a few years ago, when everybody cut from 22 pages back to 20 pages, it seems like the smallest change in the world, and yet everyone was having months and months of trying to adjust to that simple new rhythm of losing 10% of the pages. It can be done. I mean, that part is not really the issue. In fact, I've given the answer way more time and importance than it deserves.
So let's move on to another title that you listed, and that's a Humanoids title, Louisa Now and Then. Tell me, and now was this, I guess, tell me a little bit about who the creators are, first of all, just kind of about the work.
Well, I mean, the work itself, I want to, so that I'm not accused of shilling, I want to point out that my love for this work far predates my job as publisher at Humanoids. It was that year, 2018, I think, again, time has no meaning, was the best thing I read that year, hands down. And I would buy copies and just give them to people because I so love that story. It is a story about a young woman, adult, you know, in her late 30s, early 40s. I forget, honestly, but it kind of doesn't matter because what happens is her 14-year-old self just magically shows up on her doorstep one day. And neither of them understand how this happens. And it's not time travel in a sort of big machine, Back to the Future way. It's just more magic realism in the sense that the girl just shows up. And then the two of them together have to sort of figure out what's wrong with their lives and learn about acceptance, learn about self-acceptance, and learn about, learn from each other, even though they're the same person. It's just a really good book.
And is this kind of indicative of, is this the kind of thing that we'll see a lot of from Humanoids? I mean, in this case, this was a previously existing work, but, how would you describe that market segment or that audience or that this book represents?
Can you reframe the question? Because I'm not quite sure I understand.
So, so is this, is the typical reader of this book different from the typical reader of someone who might have a shelf full of Humanoids books?
Probably, probably so. Which way we've sequestered it into the Lifetron line, but it is still it hews to a principle that I feel very strongly about, and it's something that I ask of every proposal that comes across my desk and every script that comes across my desk, which is, why is this a comic? Why isn't this, if it could be a movie, if it could be a TV show, if it could be a stage play, or it could be a novel without any sort of real work, then I don't think it needs to be a comic. No great work of genius ever appeared in some medium that it wasn't originally intended for or wasn't designed for. So that we look for, and it has that element. Louisa has that element to it. There are things in it. There are graphic design moments. There are storytelling moments using the language of comics that could only be told in comics. And so that, as different as that is from, say, the Meta Barons or the INCAL, it still holds that place in my heart as, oh, you can only do this in comics.
And I mean, because in reading this, it seemed like it, to a certain extent, resists categorization, which can be tough because we're always trying to categorize things. We're trying to say this is for audiences between ages X and X, and this is,
right.
But is this, I mean, realizing that you then have to market it as a category, like, what do you say about this book?
Well, I wish I'd campaigned to have your questions ahead of time. That's what I should have.
That's okay. No,
I mean, it's not necessarily for people who like ray guns and high adventure, because it's not that. It's a very quiet book, but it is for readers who enjoy slice of life stuff. It is for readers who are a little more introspective and looking for a little more introspection and an adult nature in their work that is not sexual or graphic, but I mean adult in the sense of the themes they deal with, and adult in the sense of the concerns that these characters are facing.
Well, and this is one of the few that we're going to talk about. It seems like this is one where if we could just put it in people's hands, where the reader who's going to love this, there's a population of readers who are going to love this book that may not ever get to the places where comics are sold necessarily. But then how do you deal with that issue, like finding the readers? It
is one of the hardest things about doing comics and graphic novels. I mean, yes, they've achieved enormous penetration in pop culture and in the pop culture audience over the last 20 years, which is great, but it still brings you up short when you think, oh, everybody gets graphic novels, everybody gets comics, and then you'll read an article in USA Today or wherever I read yesterday where it's hey, if you run out of things to read in the summer, why don't you try graphic novels? Which it's kind of hurts me that, okay, I guess we're not still, to some people, we're still not in that category of, no, it's a novel. It doesn't matter whether or not it has pictures or not. It's still dealing with novel, the kind of things you could do with long form novel stuff. So, I mean, we have a really good sales team. We have a really progressive sales team in the sense that we are always looking for markets that haven't been touched. We're always looking for places to sell these books. How can we do it in digital that is a different way than people are doing it? How do we reach certain audience members more directly? Is it through our website? Is it through, direct outreach? Is it through conventions? We're dedicated to putting those books into the hands of the right people.
And I should just give the credits. The author of Louise and Now and Then is Carol Morell, and Mariko Tamaki is the translator, or what's the how would I describe?
It's a translator, polisher, I suppose.
Yeah.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. It's
okay.
not just a matter of. It's not just a matter of, hey, we're going to translate this word for word. Somebody has to come in and really shape it up and make it a story. Yeah.
Because this is one of those books, that I would, there are those books that you give to people who say they don't like comics or that they've never considered reading comics, and you wouldn't give them All-Star Superman.
No, but you give them Fun Home. You'd give them blankets. You'd give them Louisa. That very much is in that tone, that frame.
So another book on your list is Pluto, which is published by Viz, and the writer-artist is Naoki Urasawa. And I always say I'm deathly afraid I'm mispronouncing these names as I go through them. But
I believe that's right, yeah.
Yeah. But this is the only one of these that I haven't read. So you sell it to me. Why should I go out and get this book and read it right this minute?
It is a long-form murder mystery about robots. That's the short take. That's your elevator pitch. And the long form version is it's basically an expansion of the Astro Boy universe back in the day. And it's more of as Alan Moore took, say, Swamp Thing or Miracle Man and sort of found a way to do them with an adult flair to them. So is this with Astro Boy. And I was not expecting to like this. I was not really drawn to the material. I honestly do not remember how it ended up on my iPad a few years ago. But I had just blown not one, but two tires at once on the freeway. And I got towed to the nearest Volvo station, which was 1,000,000 miles from my house. So I just had to sit there all afternoon in the waiting room, waiting for these tires. And as you know, being in one of those rooms, 5 minutes is an eternity. It's just, especially if you don't want to watch Fox News. So I opened up the iPad and I started reading Pluto. And my hand to God, at about the 6th, 7th mark with a little more left to go, they came in and said, your car's ready. And I'm like, hang on, got to finish it. All in one sitting. It's not just weird science fiction ideas. There's just so much heart to it. And it really is an exploration of what technology will bring in the future and how that will affect our emotions and how that will affect how we relate to one another, which again, we're seeing right now. I mean, how does technology affecting the way we're dealing with each other? It's having, I don't know what the long-term effects of all this are, but they're going to be profound. I don't know about you, but I haven't seen, other than my girlfriend, I have not seen another human being in the last 5 months that I already knew personally. I've seen clerks, I've seen people at McDonald's, but I've not seen anybody I know. And so this is, it's an expansion of that idea of here's the day after tomorrow, here's the future on us right now. How is that affecting us personally?
Is there anything in reading that as a comics writer, you read and you think, my goodness, this just taught me something, or or what are some of the lessons you got from it, just in terms of the way you told the story?
We get back to pacing, which we talked about a moment ago. I mean, when you're doing manga, when you're doing long form manga, it moves much quicker. It's a lot more decompressed. And at first I itch when I see that, because I think of comics as an economy of storytelling. I think of comics as, a comic book is 100 postcards that you've got to tell your story. and you got to do it quick and you got to do it simply. But manga really obviously blows the doors off that. It's a much more expanded, there's a lot more air in that story. And it just made me think. I mean, you got to be arrogant if you think that only Americans know how to do comics. You got to be really arrogant to think, oh, manga, well, dude, look how popular they are. Look, and there's a reason for that. And if you think you're better than that, you're just being a jerk. So what I can learn from pacing, what I can learn from taking chances about sort of breaking away from my precept of, you know, tight, compressed storytelling, I think I learned some stuff.
You got this on your iPad somehow? Like, did someone recommend this to you, or how did you come to get this in your hands?
If you waterboarded me, I wouldn't be able to tell you. I don't remember.
Because it's funny. I think of just book recommendations, and it's always I'm looking for the kind of gateway manga title, and there have been a couple that I've read that I just I think Bakuman and Drops of God are two that I read the first few books of. But yeah, I just know that it's just I just haven't found the right book or series yet that really.
I mean, some stuff just doesn't register. I mean, I have no doubt that Attack on Titan is a brilliant story, but I've tried it 2 or 3 times and I just come into the skid, you know, at the last few pages, and like I just can't make this work in my head. So that's just not every book. It's a lesson I preach frequently to online critics. Not every book is for every audience, and that's okay.
So another book that you listed, and this is a recent Humanoids book, is Omni. This is by Devin Grayson, Aletha Martinez, Brian Valenza. And this is one I just read a couple days ago. And so so I know what it's all about, but tell our audience kind of what is Omni all about?
Sure. It's about a Black doctor, surgeon working Doctors Without Borders. And in the middle of a raid from local rebels, she finds herself suddenly ignited with this weird power that her intelligence increases, you know, tenfold, and her ability to think approaches the speed of light. So she's suddenly a doctor who can see through so many different forms of intelligence, sort of see how this works, how that works. She can analyze anything instantly and analyze the situation and try to figure out the best way to deal with it. Like, again, it's an extension of just being a doctor. And now she's traveling the world looking for others like her, trying to figure out where this power came from. And it's along the way dealing with social justice issues and dealing with real world problems that we're dealing with today.
And I mean, this is a book that is, it isn't like kind of the social justice issues are just kind of ancillary. It seems like that's kind of at the core of what the book's about. So why just to kind of walk me through the decision to like, this is going to be at the heart of what this book is about.
A lot of that lies with Devin. A lot of that lies with Aletha's passion for certain things that ties into what Devin likes. And that's what the book should be about. And it was a no-brainer to say, okay, the book is about a woman. So we need to have someone of color. We need to have a woman. We need to have, a mixture of people who don't look like me working on this book because of what it's saying about the way Black women are viewed in America today to some degree. And Devin just took the ball and ran with it because we've known each other a long, long time. And we both know that the only stories that are really worth writing and the ones that are really going to stick to your bones are the ones that are dealing even allegorically with the things that are happening outside your window.
And so, and just kind of talking about some of the, like there's in the first few parts of this, in the first book, there's a plot line involving child detainees who are immigrants. There also is kind of police, police misconduct is kind of a plot element early on. Yeah. It's one of those things that, I can imagine some publishers or some writers being like, that's just going to fire people up, or
Dude,
or
not us.
yeah, yeah.
If anything, I mean, I think there were a couple of times where Devin said, "Can I go this far?" I said, "Go further. Go push it all the way. Tell the story you want to tell."
And I wonder, is this? I mean, is this an open-ended story? Could this be a story that, or is this a story with a clear endpoint?
It's an open-ended story. I mean, in the second volume, which comes out, a few months later, she's dealing more with finding others who are like her, and dealing more with, again, certain problems that are world outside your window problems. And so it should be an ongoing series of adventures, because it's such a great character. She's so rich and she's so interesting. She's not automatically the nicest person in the world. She's not automatically the most pleasant person to be around all the time, but her point of view on the world is very important, and it's saying some stuff that needs to be heard right now.
We were talking a little bit ago about how comics kind of need to work as comics, and reading this, one of the things I thought was like, my goodness, this is just like screaming to be adapted to other media. Or it seems like like you can see it working really well as a TV show. Yeah. You can see it really, and I wonder, what do you think is like? Because you don't necessarily want a comic that's like the widescreen movies. We've seen that, or you do. Those can be. But
I mean, I'd say every publisher, whether they will tell you so or not, every publisher at this point, especially because of COVID, especially because of the financial, crashing that's happening in the world, and everybody's sort of struggling to keep a leg up. Every publisher has those one or two projects that is, we want that to be a comic, but really we're hoping Hollywood will come sniff. Mm-hmm. This is not one of those, although that does not keep people from knocking on our door, which keeps happening, which is great. But I've completely cut off your question, so I apologize.
No, that's okay.
But this is not one of those. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the main character in Omni, there are scenes where she's kind of the reader can see how she's able to think, basically, and that's something you can only do on the page. But at the same time, I think there are just thematic elements where I could see, and I think it's a compliment to the work, and not just I could see it. I could see this as a as a TV show. Yeah.
The visual that Devin came up with that Aletha just hit out of the park was great, which is that when you normally think, okay, this person's the smartest person on earth, you're thinking Sherlock, you're thinking Brainiac 5, you're thinking, Pinky, or not Pinky, the Brain. And it's not that. It's instead, Devin went further into it and sort of looked at psychology deep into it, and found a theory that there are really sort of 7 or 8 different kinds of intelligence that all of us have some degree of, more than others. So you can be, musically intelligent and really sort of interpret the world in terms of the music of it, and in terms of finding the music in the world and the things around you. You can have an emotional intelligence, which again, right, that's a phrase we all know. Different sorts of intelligence, and they're all represented in the book by different colored avatars of Cecilia, which is, again, that made that book sing for me.
And remind me, like, where in terms of the development of that book, was that one, like, when you came to Humanoids, were you did you develop that book, or was that development process, how did that work?
Sure, that was already locked in place. What had happened was editor Fabrice Sapolsky had sat down with several creators, Yannick Paquette, Kwanzaa Ozefeo, and Carlos B. McNeil, to come up with what was intended to be sort of a comic book universe, not superheroes per se, but all like 3 different books with this idea that all of these characters have been weirdly ignited with powers, and they've got to sort of figure out what's going on. And this we knew, like I came into this after it was developed, but before it was started, and I gotta tell you, I mean, we knew this was the one. And I'm saying this as somebody who wrote one of them. This is a better one than the one I wrote, and I knew it was going in. And so the other ones, frankly, didn't do as well. And so this is the one we want to put our money behind. This is the horse we want to back, because we know this is the strongest concept. For all the good, I mean, again, people working on all these other books did an exceptional job, but this was the one that spoke to the moment.
Now, this is a book that I read the first book, so it was the first, and I can't recall how many, how many individual issues that were included in that. Was it the first four?
First four, yeah.
Just in terms of what format do you think works best for getting readers kind of hooked on a book like that?
Not periodical. I'm not sure that works for anybody anymore. It's tricky, and it would take me longer than we have to explain what would seem like easy math in terms of why you can't just go straight to graphic novel on stuff, and instead you want to go periodical and then collect a graphic novel. Beyond the fact that the difficulty of doing straight to graphic novel is it also keeps your creators off the board and sort of out of the public eye for maybe a year at a time, which they're not, nobody's really keen to do. There's just this insane Byzantine math that I can barely explain. It's like going to metric and back again in the middle of a conversation. But basically, there's going to be a place for periodicals before going straight to graphic novels for a while yet to come. That said, as somebody who grew up in periodicals, I still think that, especially if you're reaching out to a new audience, man, that's the done in one graphic novel, something with a beginning, middle, and end. That's the way to go.
Because I think for me, anyway, reading this, that was like the second or third. I mean, it wasn't that first chunk where I really felt like I was into it. And it was, I mean, I think like 4 issues is about, a healthy meal. Yeah. So the last book that we were going to talk about is an absolute classic, The Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck.
Yep.
By Don Rosa. So what makes I mean, of course, this is one we could talk for days about, but what makes this one special?
And it's hard to sell to adults because you look at the duck and go, it's a duck, it's Donald Duck, it's for kids stuff. And to a large extent it is, but it's all ages. I mean, that book, Don Rosa is, as Mark Waid is a Superman, Don Rosa is to Uncle Scrooge in terms of the love, the knowledge, the wealth of information contained in his head. And he did something amazing with this character who's been around for 70 years. A couple of decades ago, he sat down and he read all of the original Karl Barks duck stories. He was the guy who created Uncle Scrooge. He was unquestionably the greatest Donald Duck, Uncle Scrooge writer artist ever, which we all know. I mean, he's the guy. So he went through and he read all of the stories, and he picked up on this thing that Scrooge references from his youth, or he picks up on this flashback that happens in this one story, and he knits it all together into this amazing, life and times of the world's richest duck, and how you go from one dime as a shoeshine boy all the way to being the richest in the world, and the adventures you have along the way, meeting Teddy Roosevelt, getting involved in the gold rush, visiting ancient worlds and dealing with weird and really fascinating pieces of life, parts of the world that we don't normally think about. And man, that thing is just a Swiss watch. That thing is just, you couldn't take a panel out of that thing without the whole thing falling over like a Jenga. And it's dense, but it's a great read. It's funny, but it's poignant, and it has high adventure in it. And you really could hand that book to anybody. And if they like reading, man, this is the book for them. This is the graphic novel for them.
One of the things that's really interesting about The Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck is how it explains some of Scrooge's rougher edges. Where when you've read that, because the thing about the character is he's kind of a jerk. He's
very much a jerk.
Yeah. He treats his family at times very poorly. He's this absolute skinflint, but you realize, in this, that he got to be this way through these decades of hard knocks, in which he's getting taken advantage of by people, in which he's, having these adventures where he loses everything several times. And it's just,
it illustrates something that I also teach when I teach writing classes, which is that you don't necessarily have to love your protagonist. You don't have to, I hear the criticism all the time, we don't really, it's an interesting character, but I don't really love that character, so I'm not sure he's the lead character. No. You don't have to love the character. You just have to want something for them. You have to want them to achieve whatever they've set out to achieve, whether it can even be comeuppance is what you want for them, but something. And as you say, that is the book that really makes you invested in Scrooge as a person and gives this throwaway character in pop culture a real depth and a real personality, and makes you, like you said, he's still a jerk sometimes, but you still want something from him. You still want him to succeed because you've read this book.
Well, that's one of those books that gets resold in different formats. And I think for people who have read it and love it, they'll end up buying it like 4 or 5 different times.
I certainly have. Yeah.
Those are 5 books. And you wrote a list of 10 books. So this is just kind of a sampling of some of the books that you've really enjoyed. Wanted to ask you now, just kind of how are you holding up in this? We're in this very strange time right now. We're having a virtual cartoon crossroads Columbus. You're in the Los Angeles area right now. I'm in Columbus. What's it been like for you during the pandemic?
It's been challenging in ways I never expected, because not so much because of the personal stuff, because I live like a hermit anyway. Although it's, and that is in no way to belittle the real struggles and the financial hardships and the store closing that people are having to deal with. And that breaks my heart. Like you, I'm sure, every week you'll walk down a familiar street and you'll see something else that you love boarded up. And that's heartbreaking. The real challenge for me has not been the personal stuff. It has been, like I said, now the publisher at a very, very strange time. The very first day I took the job, with an arrogance that was not seen since Icarus flew toward the sun, I said to the staff, listen, I've been doing this for 35 years. I've worked everywhere. I've been in every capacity. I've worked in every capacity in comics. I've seen every problem you can have. We can solve whatever there is. In fact, I look forward to you bringing me a problem I've never seen before. And then this, a week later. So I was an idiot. The good news is for Reese Geiger, who owns Humanoids, has faith in his staff and faith in the company enough where there's been no pencils down order. There's been no, furloughing. There's been nothing like, which business as usual for us. All we really did was sort of push our slate back another quarter because nobody's buying books right now. But the challenge of keeping a team of office workers together and in harmony. We've got great people. We have a very small staff of like 7 or 8 people, but and they're terrific and they all work hard, but it's not the same as being in an office and just being able to pop your head in and go, hey Rob, what's going on here? Or the idle conversations you find yourself having during a coffee break with people that that you don't normally have a conversation with. It's without that camaraderie, I'm finding it harder to steer the ship a little bit, but we're getting better at it. Thank God for Zoom. That is a challenge. I think we have to. I mean, we have overcome it to some degree, and we're going to have to overcome it flatly because this isn't changing anytime soon. We're not going to go back to the office anytime really soon. Nobody is, and so you have to accept the fact that this is the way life is now, which hit me pretty hard a few weeks ago because we have these Monday morning meetings. This is a much longer answer than you wanted, but I'm sorry. As you know, if you ask me what time it is, I'll tell you how to build a clock. So we have our Monday morning meetings, and so we started having them on Zoom. And for the first few weeks, I really sort of I realized I was approaching them as sort of like, hey, I know these are unusual circumstances, so thanks everybody for taking, doing this and being flexible about this and this. And a few weeks ago, I just realized, no, I don't have to say that anymore. I don't get to say that anymore. This is the way it is. And it's harder to be creative. It is harder to be motivated, not just for me or my staff. I mean, everybody is involved in any sort of creative endeavor. But we have to keep pushing forward, hoping that there's some hope out there. And this is where I personally get really put to the test, because if you look at my body of work, I think the one thing you will find is there's no cynicism in it. I don't have any use for cynicism. It angers me, and whether it's personal, whether it's in a story, I find it useless. And it's easy. Cynicism is so easy. Hope is the harder part. And so now I'm really put to the test. This is the way I tell my stories, and this is the way I sort of conduct my life. Well, these are very, very dark times. So I think the real challenge for me is sort of hanging on to that ship as it's being tossed across the sea. Mm-hmm. That all of that sounds trivial in the big picture of things. And I kind of regret I went off on that tangent, but I hope that kind of answered your question.
Well, I would think that kind of how your day-to-day life is kind of going amid this pandemic has a lot to do with kind of what a publisher at a company like Humanoids does. And I think for an average person watching this, they won't necessarily think, oh yeah, here's the 5 things that a publisher at a comics company does. Like what is a day in your life, professional life like?
Oh my God. So Matt, that's the thing about being publisher is there are so many pieces moving at any given time, and solving a simple problem. I'll give you an example. Solving a simple problem of, we need to hire somebody for this position. Well, we know in a perfect world, what that position looks like and what that needs. We have 5 candidates, and one of them can do this, but not that. And 2 of them can do this and that, but they only have limited bandwidth. And 3 of them can do this, this, and this, but they don't live in a part of the country. They're living so far away from us, they're not in the time zone. So staffing that one job takes days, because it's like one of those logic problems where it's like, Fred wears a red sweater and Mary wears blue shoes, but she's sitting next to Tommy, who is wearing a hat. Who sits next to each other? It's very much like that. So that's part of it. The harder part is to put all that stuff aside and delegate that stuff in order to really drill down on what you need to do, because the number one job of the publisher is to set a direction for the company. And I think we've done that reasonably successfully. I think that you'll obviously see more of that in the next year as these books come out. The other big part of the job is setting the team up for success. And this is true of anybody who's a boss. That's my priority. I have to put them in a position where they can succeed, or else everything falls apart. So it's keeping the unity together. And again, we're doing a good job of it. But in a perfect world, we'd all be in the same room, and we'd all still have the same, here's the big board of stuff that we're doing that everybody can see. Well, you can do that as a Google sheet too, but it's not the same. So again, once more, I fear that I have strayed far away from your question.
Oh no, that's okay. I wonder if, do you ever think of like, man, I wonder what that alternate timeline would be like, where I started in this job and there wasn't a pandemic, where it's like, because it seems like the business just got so hard the moment you started this. And it's like, you come into a job with plans, and it's like, when you have to kind of throw out the plan, it's like, I know if I was in your shoes, I'd be thinking, man, I want to be on Earth 2 right now.
But yeah, playbook went right out the window. But the good news is that we got, and I know everybody says this and it sounds trite, but I mean it from my heart. We really do have people on staff who are capable of meeting these challenges, and it's stuff that we talk about on a regular basis. So we're not taking it for granted that we have to keep doing things this way, or we have to keep doing things that way. I love the fact that I'm surrounded by people who are willing to question absolutely every aspect of how we do what we do, and how we get that material out, and what we're going to publish, because that's the flexibility you need in this thing. I think the people that are going to fall off, the people that are going to fall hard, are the companies and the publishers that are still clinging to bits and pieces of a working model that functioned 6 months ago that just no longer functions. And I think you have to really be willing to dig deep.
Well, and you've provided a perfect segue to the kind of the last thing I wanted to talk with you about, which is just this, we're watching retail in general, because it's not like, but we're watching the business underpinnings of comics going through this monumental transition. And you've been around for a couple other big transitions. Based on what you've seen and what you've learned over all that time, how do you kind of understand or explain what's happening right now?
It's the resilience of the market, the resilience of the people who sell our comics, the store owners who are our preachers, our proselytizers, our representatives out there who are telling their people coming in stores, this is what you should look like. This is what you should look for. This is the kind of, this is the kind of material that might interest you. Those people are more resilient than I ever gave them credit for. And if you had asked me 6 months ago if this would have destroyed the comics industry, I think I would have said yes, because it has always been fragile. And especially in the last 10, 20 years, it's been very, very fragile. At any moment, if DC makes some weird move, I also said, I'd say things like, oh, if DC ever leaves Diamond, that's it. The business is over with, because nobody's going to step up to take Diamond, take a Diamond job, because who wants to do that? Who wants to do what Diamond's doing? That's a big job. Well, people stepped in, and DC made some big moves, and other companies have made some big moves. And God damn it, we made it all work, and we're still here. And I think that we have hit. I think that we have hit a point where we can rise now. I think that I don't think there's much. I'm trying not to say I think we've hit bottom. I don't want to. I'm trying not to say that, but that's basically what I'm saying. I think we hit bottom, and we survived. And I think that we're in a position to climb back up. Store owners are so resilient, and the ones that I thought would be out of business by now, they're finding ways, whether it's mail order or I go on Facebook, and immediately there's 6 comic stores that I know that are online right now, and they're selling stuff online to their customers, and it's working. People love comics, man. This wouldn't work if it were the Buggy Whip factory. This wouldn't work if it were, if we were selling Frisbees necessarily, but we're selling something that people really, truly have an emotional attachment to and want to use as an escape, and want to use because we're in the periodical business as much as anything, that sense of familiarity. You're looking for comfort anywhere you can, right? I don't know about you, but I put on 20 pounds because it's just comfort food all the time. I'm looking for the familiar. And that comics does that well. So it surprises me how well that does it, or how much that was needed. If anything, and I know, again, once more, I've given you a 20-minute long answer, but the need for something like this, the need for entertainment like this, I wasn't sure the need was as strong as it is, but clearly it is. And that fills me with some hope.
So we like the 20-minute answers. We like the 5-minute answers.
Okay.
No, that's good.
5-minute warning.
And so I wonder, and I should mention also for people in our audience who are not familiar with just some of the changes that have been taking place in comics distribution. Diamond Comics Distributors is the kind of major distributor, and DC has stopped distributing through Diamond, which is a big change for comic shops, and is
a big hit. Yeah. And it creates all kind of chaos. You can still get comic shops and still get their DC comics, but it's a different world. And so, like you said, chaos.
So you and I have spoken once before, and it was a few years ago, where you saw seemingly perfectly into the future, where you were kind of describing the way comics retail was changing and what things might look like in a few years. And I guess I wonder, obviously a lot has happened just in the last 4 or 5 years. Yeah. 5 years from now, what do you think? How's the comics business going to be different than it is today?
Boy, you asked me 5 years ago when things were fairly stable. This is looking forward 5 years from now. We'll see fewer publishers. There's just so many, even if we start recovering from COVID by the end of the year, there's still so much damage done. There's still so much. That's the inertia of the financial problems that's caused will continue for a while. You'll see fewer publishers. I'm not sure Diamond's going to be around. Great if they are, but losing DC is losing, 35% of their business. That's a number I pulled out of the air, but it's a big chunk, whatever it is. And that's hard to sustain. It was, you know, it was a thin margin business to begin with. But, and I think that I said this to you 5 years ago, and I still stand by it. I think digital is going to seize more of the audience. I think that there is just something. Well, before, when I said about the appeal of digital is it is a pants-free experience. I think I described it to you back then. It is, I don't have to do anything to get my comics. I just log on. I don't have to go to the comic store and have to do anything. And there's, you know, there was people who were very into that back then. More people now, not as many as I would have predicted, but I think this is the sort of crisis that really sets the stage for far less print, far more digital. You and I have talked about how we have different points of view on this. I'm better with, I like the tactile, but I'm better with digital. You know, you're a Luddite. I totally get it. I have all respect for you. I think I think somewhere in the middle, people are going to meet a lot more.
Mm-hmm. And just in terms of comics creatively, it seems like, the business stuff is kind of a question of kind of how do we get our comics? Right. Do you think, I mean, is the kind of creative atmosphere and underpinnings of comics strong right now and getting stronger? Or do you think, what's your sense of where things are heading?
Far stronger. I mean, it is, people have caught on to the fact that this is a way for voices to be heard. This is a relatively inexpensive media way for voices to be heard. You don't have to invest in TV. You don't have to build a TV show around someone's point of view. You don't have to build a movie around someone's unique point of view who has something they want to say. Comics are easy. And we have a long way to go. We still have a long way to go, and I cannot underscore that enough. But the biggest change I have seen in comics since I started is the diversity that has entered our field. And a lot of that was our own fault. I mean, it was all our own fault. As comics publishers, it was our fault because we were publishing things specifically targeted toward white boys. So why would you even expect, how dare you even expect people of color, people of gender, other people coming in being really invested in that stuff the same way that white boys are? It wasn't made for them. More creators came in. We, managed to fight their way through, like Aletha Martinez is a really good example. And more of those stories came out. And as more of those stories came out, the boulder started rolling down the hill, and more creators were joining in who, again, have points of view that are not mine, they're not yours. And that is a train that ain't going to stop. And that is a train that fascinates me because if I'm going to continue to grow as a publisher personally, if I'm going to continue to grow as a creator personally, I have to latch onto that stuff and pay attention and find out what's working and find out how it works and learn from it. Because again, stories are only as good as the people telling them. I mean, if you got something to say, you have a voice in comics. You can doing comics is easy. It's only sweat equity. You go online, you do your own digital comics. There's no barrier. So it's such a great way for people to get their feelings out and say what they've got to say in a most tumultuous time.
So Mark, if we were at the downtown Columbus Library, this is the part where everyone will give you a big round of applause, but I guess all of the people watching at home now can give you a big round of applause. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and thank you so much for being part of the show this year.
Thank you for putting up to my rambling. I appreciate it. Thanks.